Well, good afternoon, everybody. Oh, they reset the clock. And thank you, Mr. Davis, for that kind and very long introduction. It does remind me that, I'm getting old. But I want to thank you, and I also need to thank the ICT for convening us all in this important moment. Particularly, I want to call out Boaz Ganor. Boaz and his team have been longstanding friends of the State Department's Counter-Terrorism Bureau, and we really appreciate their partnership and their advice. I'm particularly grateful to ICT for scheduling this event in the weeks after the United States airstrike on Ayman al-Zawahiri, the leader of al-Qaeda, which marked an important counterterrorism success for this administration. And I want to thank you all for bearing with us late in the afternoon, after lunch, and hopefully you can stay awake another 13 minutes and 53 seconds. We're really excited to participate this year after 2 years of being absent due to COVID. And so we really value this opportunity. The State Department's Counterterrorism Coordinator has been a regular participant in these gatherings. My predecessor, Nathan Sales, spoke at the last in-person conference the ICT convened in September of 2019. The focus of his speech was keep the pressure on al-Qaeda. Well, I'm happy to be here to say we've done that. And we're continuing to press and keep the pressure on that terrorist network. The strike that eliminated Ayman al-Zawahiri and dealt a blow to al-Qaeda serves as a reminder to our terrorist adversaries that if they harm the United States and its allies, they'll find no safe haven anywhere. As counterterrorism practitioners, we learn to adapt to the opportunities and constraints of our operating environment. A military withdrawal from Afghanistan was long overdue and supported by the majority of American people. But that doesn't mean that we're walking away from our commitment to confront terrorist threats in that part of the world or anywhere else. Our strike to take out Zawahiri made clear that the United States will not stand for the sheltering of al-Qaeda leadership or a reversion to the status quo from before the September 11 attacks. The Counterterrorism Bureau at the State Department, along with our partners throughout the US government and the entire counterterrorism architecture developed in the last 2 decades, is clear-eyed about the threats we face and working to keep us all safe. Today, I'd like to talk a little bit more about how we see the threat and what we're doing to address it. And it's fitting that I'm following General Lute's comments because one of the elements of our approach to counterterrorism is that we're doing it in a context of security and national security challenges more broadly. And so while we're expanding the aperture, we are still focused on counterterrorism. To sort of frame this, I want to borrow the metaphor that the conference organizer used of the eye of the storm to sort of frame the whole week's discussion. I think it's an apt way to describe our present situation with regards to terrorist threats, and I'll use it to frame my remarks. First, I want to emphasize that we remain vigilant even through the terrorist threat might seem more diffuse today than in comparison to previous periods. Looking around the corner of our present moment, we see much to remain concerned about regarding terrorist threats in Israel's neighborhood and beyond. After that, I'll discuss what this administration has learned in countering terrorism and how that has informed the administration's approach to the threats we face. Just as someone in the eye of the storm must survey past damage in order to prepare for the next onslaught, So too must we take stock of what we've experienced in years past to be smarter about how we face terrorist threats in the future. We understand that being in the eye of the storm means that the present conditions of relative calm are temporary, requiring us to acknowledge the future threats we expect to return in force. In the Middle East, for example, we're extremely concerned that all the structural conditions that precipitated the emergence of conflict and terrorism in the past decade have either remained or have worsened. Consider how countries in Israel's immediate neighborhood continue to struggle with weak governance, social fragmentation, and economic grievances among the populations, leaving a vacuum that terrorist organizations continue to exploit. The region is also grappling with questions of how terrorists and insurgents could exploit emerging technologies like blockchain-based cryptocurrencies, encrypted communications, digital deepfakes, and drone swarms, use them all for their nefarious purposes. Add to this a major shift in geopolitics. With Russia and China, there's increasing competition, uncertainty, and instability around the world. We're concerned with the growing possibility of more conflict similar to Russia's war of aggression with Ukraine. And we know, to paraphrase an axiom that counterterrorism practitioners can appreciate, wars anywhere provide an opportunity for terrorists everywhere. Finally, we must consider Iran, which destabilizes the Middle East region by providing its terrorist proxies and partners with means to wage war, and which has been deeply involved in the Syrian regime's war against its own people. Iran seeks to duplicate its time-tested playbook of supporting non-state armed groups in places such as Yemen and Iraq, Lebanon, Syria, and elsewhere, with training and advanced weapons that are used to inflict violence on civilians across the region in the service of Iran's political interests. Iran engages in these destabilizing actions to extort and coerce countries in the Middle East while extending its influence across the Arabian Peninsula and well beyond. We're under no illusions about the threat an intransigent Iran poses worldwide, including to the United States. Iran and the groups it supports are not a distant theoretical threat to the United States. As you undoubtedly all saw in late August, we launched a precision strike against a facility in Syria used by militia groups affiliated with the IRGC in response to armed attacks against US forces in the region. Also, the US Justice Department recently indicted an IRGC operative for plotting to assassinate the former US National Security Advisor, which I know other speakers have referred to. The Department of Justice and the FBI have successfully prosecuted 3 Hezbollah operatives over the past several years for conducting surveillance and other terrorist-related activities on US soil. So we have seen up close and firsthand the dangers the Iranian-linked terrorism poses. We're urging governments around the world to designate, ban, or otherwise restrict Hezbollah from operating in their territories. These actions are critical to restricting Hezbollah's ability to fundraise, to support its operations, crippling the group's efforts to take advantage of Lebanon's financial crisis to deepen their control over the country approximately 200 kilometers from here. Aside from Hezbollah, we have designated where possible and are pursuing all avenues otherwise to undermine Iran-aligned militia groups where they emerge. Iran's reliance for decades on terroristic violence to advance its political agenda is unacceptable. Rest assured, we will continue to confront Iran's use of and support of terrorism, regardless of the outcome of the nuclear negotiations. So if we agree with our conference organizers that we're in the eye of the storm, as far as terrorism threats are concerned. What can we do to both counter terrorism and prepare properly? I'd argue that there are two major lessons that we have learned and can marshal to be smarter in how we face the next terrorism wave. First, we have learned that counterterrorism requires a careful and more comprehensive approach. Eliminating senior terrorist leaders like Zawahiri and other terrorist operatives is critical, but over the long term, we cannot defeat our terrorist adversaries with the force of military might alone. Careful and more comprehensive counterterrorism approaches require the effective integration of the full spectrum of counterterrorism capabilities most appropriate to each threat. We have strong hammers, but not every terrorist problem is a nail. Considering and even using the full counterterrorism toolkit, including intelligence and information, is a start. But more than that, we need to focus our efforts on using the right counterterrorism tools at the right time to solve the problem at hand. For example, now that we have territorially defeated ISIS's so-called caliphate, we are seeing civilian tools come to the fore. These civilian tools include capacity building assistance for countries to facilitate repatriation of their nationals from northeast Syria and stabilization programs in territories liberated from ISIS. Both of these efforts are necessary to ensure the long-term defeat of ISIS in the Iraq-Syria region. Civilian counterterrorism tools are an essential part of our counterterrorism toolkit. They help us prevent terrorists from capturing wide swaths of territory or attracting large numbers of adherents. They inspire confidence in local authorities to provide legitimate security through outreach and engagement, a reliance on the rule of law and good security sector governance. They deprive terrorist sources of recruitment and support with credible efforts to prevent, investigate, prosecute, incarcerate, and rehabilitate the terrorist threat. They build partnerships and partner capacity so that while we are in the eye of the storm, we can invest now in the necessary tools to emerge better prepared to meet the next threats. Some of the principles that we use or follow in the pursuit of these tools include an emphasis on partnerships, or as our organizers might say, it takes a network to fight a network. To achieve lasting counterterrorism successes means building alliances. We have done that with the 85-member Defeat ISIS Coalition, which is not only focused on Iraq and Syria now, but is also looking at other ISIS hotspots, particularly in Africa and Central Asia. An emphasis on civilian-driven efforts to defeat terrorist adversaries by finding ways to get them off the battlefield, keep them off, and ideally prevent them from joining the battle to begin with. Military action alone risks one terrorist simply being replaced by another. So civilian approaches, such as countering violent extremism, strengthening border security, and providing rehabilitation and reintegration pathways for those seeking to renounce violence, are also crucial. This is a tall order, but even a small margin of success increases confidence, provides added protection for our civilians, and reduces the cost of military engagement with our terrorist adversaries, should the situation call for one. An emphasis on partner-led approaches is another principle. Our adversaries know that U.S. troops cannot and will not remain deployed forever, nor should they be. We need willing and committed partners with skin in the game who can work with us and who we can help develop the tools that they need to stay in the fight when we are no longer there to advise and assist. In summary, our methods emphasize an approach that is civilian-driven, partner-led, and U.S.-enabled, and one that is rooted in multilateral diplomacy, because we know that to inflict a lasting defeat on any agile adversary that only needs to survive to win requires a considered and collaborative approach. Second, the US national security priorities are shifting to account for the strategic competition. This is what General Lute was talking about. The importance of this shift is clear, but it is forcing us to acknowledge something we ought to have learned in our many years of counterterrorism is not an island. It is linked to other factors in a comprehensive and successful national security strategy. In this regard, as Homeland Security Advisor Elizabeth Sherwood Randall explained in a speech last year commemorating the 20th anniversary of the 9/11 attacks, our approach will be focused on integrating our counterterrorism strategy into regional strategies, nesting our counterterrorism efforts within a broader suite of initiatives, and investing in an indicators and warnings architecture that will enable us to understand the evolving threat environment. Countering terrorism as a part of a wider array of national security priorities requires us to remain focused on the terrorist threat with a smarter deployment of resources. Our counterterrorism capabilities have evolved significantly in the last 2 decades. The United States has invested unprecedented sums to construct a flexible counterterrorism architecture that combines threat detection and kinetic response with risk analysis, information sharing, watch listing, public-private partnerships, and building the capacities of our allies and partners. We are now able to pay attention to the terrorist threat while also addressing emerging issues of great national security concern. Using this counterterrorism infrastructure, we can protect our citizens and interests while simultaneously pursuing other strategic priorities. Our precision strike against a high-valued terrorist target like Zawahiri is proof of this evolution. It shows that we can make our counterterrorism architecture work to fight terrorists who threaten us. However, our new national strategy priorities demand that architecture no longer be supported to create new enemies by engaging with adversaries we may not have otherwise needed to fight because they don't threaten us directly. In conclusion, and because the clock says my time is up, our methods must adapt to meet the new threat environment. But I want to be clear that we will keep our eye on the ball, and we will work hard and smarter, drawing on lessons we have learned by weathering many storms together to address the new threats we all face and that are threatening all of us. I want to thank the organizers again for convening these discussions. I'm eager to learn more from the discussions, particularly on how CT can remain meaningfully engaged on addressing the threats we are all working hard together to mitigate. So thank you very much.